Greetings. Welcome to Black Bear News, where we are discussing climate change, abrupt climate change, and things adjacent. And I have with me today meteorologist Nick Humphrey. I've had him on as a guest before. He's very knowledgeable about climate change. I follow him on Facebook. He's very active, and he's pretty up on the news, climate news, and weather news. And I always get a lot of good information from his Facebook feed. So welcome, Nick Humphrey. How you doing?
Good. How are you doing today?
I'm all right. All right. I had to make that all official start. But yeah, man, good to have you on. What I think I'm going to do is just got a couple questions for you, but we'll just, I'll just start with some questions and then we'll just kind of let the conversation go wherever it goes.
Yeah.
But so yeah, like I said, I follow you on Facebook. And I see that you've been covering tornadoes. We were just about to talk about that before I started the video. So I wanted you to save all your info and that for this video. But if you could just talk a little bit about what's going on with the tornadoes in the Midwest and the South.
Yeah. They had issued a high risk of severe storms today for parts of Oklahoma and Northwest Texas for potentially violent tornadoes and a tornado outbreak. Looking at what's happening right now, it doesn't appear to have been as the outbreak of tornadoes doesn't appear to be as significant as expected, although there still may be some isolated strong tornadoes. There was already one that passed very close and caused some damage in parts of Magnum, if I pronounce it correctly, or Mangum, Oklahoma, in southwest Oklahoma. But the big threat down there tonight is torrential rainfall. A lot of the storms are merging into a line that's training over parts of western Oklahoma into northern Oklahoma and throughout much of eastern Kansas. And there's many areas I can see in excess of 5 inches of rain and some isolated areas up to 10 inches of rain in the next 12 hours. So a huge amount of rain and a lot of flooding.
Yeah. Texas has been getting it pretty hard lately.
Yeah.
I've been seeing.
Yeah, and Oklahoma's had too much rain this year too, and obviously that rain's going into Kansas and Missouri, which have had a lot of rain and flooding.
Right.
So yeah, it's for the plains this year, it's just it's been water, really. That's been the biggest problem. You're going to have a high risk of flash flooding in parts of Oklahoma and Kansas, but they thought that would be the tornadoes first. But it seems like the flash flood threat is starting to dominate pretty quickly in this event, and it's just going to be tons and tons of rain.
Yeah, and so there was an outlook for more rain in May, and that's actually proven out to be true.
Yeah.
Is it still, is it still an outlook for more wet weather in the Midwest and the South in the next few weeks, or are they still predicting more?
Yeah, they are actually. They both for the coming weeks, but also for going into this summer, they're expecting below average temperatures more likely than not over the Central Plains, Nebraska, Kansas, but it's also going to be above normal rainfall, maybe potentially much above normal. So you're going to continue to have more and more water on soils that are saturated in parts of Nebraska, Kansas, Missouri, Iowa, and obviously Oklahoma is getting pounded really hard tonight with heavy rainfall. I mean, I was looking at watching one of the news feeds out of Oklahoma City, and they were, they're trying to talk about the tornadoes, but there ain't really that many tornado warnings going on. But the storm chasers are like, man, we're getting stuck in the mud. We're seeing, high rainfall rates here. We can't, get anywhere. There's like storm chasers everywhere. They came down there choking the roads to see tornadoes, and they're getting stuck in the mud or getting into traffic accidents because of the rain.
It's not an easy job for sure.
Yeah.
I don't envy their profession, but I'm sure they love it. So yeah, I've been, on my channel, I've been talking about the wet weather and the floods and the saturation and the fact that there's been a disruption in the planting of the crops. Usually most, the majority of the crops are already in the ground at this point of the growing
Yeah.
season. And so the rain and the saturation is getting in the way of that. How is that looking right now as you see it?
Well, it looks bad. I mean, because they're so far behind. I think the USDA was saying that only like a third of the corn, I think, that is usually planted by this time of year has been planted. And it's usually for the whole year, actually, but it's usually 2/3. And then there are some states like South Dakota or and then here in Nebraska, they're just doing very poorly with getting their planting done. And I mean, it, what I mean, although you don't really want to deal with extreme heat, you'd rather have, I think, at least some periods of dryness to allow the soils to dry out enough to be able to actually plant the crops. Because otherwise, you just end up with mud.
Right.
But these are in areas where the crops are still possible to grow. Because I mean, the flooding in many cases nearer to rivers deposit sand and just basically took the land from the farmers. The farmers could never get it back. But a lot of places, that's not the case. You could actually technically plant and use the land, but it's covered in water. It's waterlogged, and you need lots of time to do that. But they're not getting it. I mean, even in an average season, you would expect periods of heavy rainfall to come and go during the course of late spring into the summer. It's very normal. But when you get all of this heavy snow in the winter that abruptly melted, flooded everything, you get heavy rain events, other events that were heavy rainfall in other areas of the plains and Midwest. Then you have water coming that's going to be still coming down from the mountains terrain to the west, potentially raising rivers and reflooding certain areas or keeping them flooded because of the destruction of levees from the previous floods. And then all these other events that are very bad, like what's going on tonight. It's just there's very little room to do the things you need to do because I'm not a big expert on agriculture, but it seems like you need time to
Sure.
get stuff rooted and established to grow for the summer, and that time hasn't been there. It just hasn't been available to the farmers.
Well, yeah, we've had a little. We've kind of had not as severe, but kind of the same weather patterns in LA, Southern California. Strangely, we've had a very strange winter. It's been really cold.
Yeah,
We've had a lot of rain. We just had some rain last night and yesterday, and I think there's some more in the forecast. We keep on getting. So I've been planning. I have a garden, and it's been tough for me to actually get stuff in the ground because it's been raining so much. And so I've had to wait, and then I finally got some stuff in the ground, and now it's like raining a lot, and I'm worried about it kind of killing off.
Yeah,
It's the plants that are coming up are having a hard time, establishing themselves. So it's, we're getting a little microcosm of the big problems that are happening in the Midwest. So extrapolate that to thousands of acres, and there's big problems.
Yeah, and I mean the thing that you're really noticing with abrupt climate change is this. I mean, part of the reason a lot of people normalize what's happening is because people have seen floods before, they've seen heavy rainfall events before, they've seen all these things, but what you see is a pattern where you're not only getting more of the extreme events. And so they pile up, and I mean, you can do individual attribution on this event or that event and see if it was made more likely by climate change. But regardless of whether it was or not, if you're getting more events related to climate change, directly attributable to climate change forcing on top of what you would normally get, that's bad.
Yeah.
But it's not only that one type of event like rain and flooding or drought and fire. It's the rapid swings between almost violent swings, either seasonally or yearly, between the extremes in the same places. So like California, past 2 or 3 years in a row, has gone, had wet winter, and then they burn by summer and fall, and then it gets wet again, and then it burns again. I mean, everyone's,
Yeah.
some people are worried about it burning again this summer in California, even though it's wet right now.
Right.
It's like it could be no drought, but all you have to have is a flash drought where it gets maybe in July or August, it gets really hot. Maybe you get these triple digit to 110s like you had last summer. All the grass dry out, and even if the trees, the ones that haven't been killed in previous droughts or by bugs, bark beetles, are still alive, and they're not going to burn very easily. The underbrush and some of the other rapidly growing plants will burn because they'll dry out much faster because they're smaller, and that's what happened in some of the fires last summer. They weren't forest fires so much; they were fires from all that undergrowth. And I mean, you even saw it in what was the town that burned in Northern California that killed 89 people?
Are you talking about Paradise?
Yeah, Paradise. Yeah, most of the trees didn't burn. A lot of the burning was the underbrush around the trees. Of course, that brought up a lot of conspiracy theories about why that would have happened. But I mean, that
Right.
in a lot of cases, the trees are more resistant to burning, and they were alive, but the underbrush dried out, and it burned very hot.
Yeah.
So I mean,
yeah.
Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, we have a really weird phenomenon going on in LA. Like, it's not just the underbrush is dry, but trees are kind of dying from the top down. So like the leaves will fall, the leaves are gone from the top branches. So you have trees with leaves on them, but there's just all these like bare branches sticking out.
Yeah.
And they, what they do is they try and cut off the bare branches, the dead like branches on top. And so the trees are kind of like going like, these trees that were huge and full, now are like little stubs with some green, and I see that everywhere. And it's really, because I actually pay attention to it, but like, if you weren't paying attention, you'd just be like, oh, there's, just trees. But I'm like, I see it everywhere, and it's very concerning.
Yeah.
I don't know quite all the mechanisms that are happening that are causing that, but of course it's part of it is drought, flash drought and high heat. The trees can't recover from that, but
it's just the stresses that are put on them and accumulate on them over year after year. And it's these trees can take a lot in most cases, but you're talking about going rapidly fire between all these different extremes. I don't know if we even fully understand how it may be affecting the biology of the trees and of the insects around them.
Well, I mean, we're definitely in a time, I think, this year is a good example of cascading weather events, right? Especially in the Midwest, where you have storm after storm after storm, and you have basically, what was called a bomb cyclone in the middle of the country, what, Guy McPherson was calling a land hurricane, which is basically what it was. And, which is, so that's a pretty huge anomaly of a weather event and the devastation that it brought, but they just haven't been able to recover from it. So you have this cascade of, of unusual weather that like adds up to one big, right. But it's,
and that's really what I've tried to. That's what I've tried to emphasize, especially recently, is it's not it's always the question: is this event caused by climate change or that event? It's about the especially as climate change speeds up, it's about the accumulation of damage that you can't recover from it. And I mean, that's humans and their infrastructure and their agriculture, but also the other plants and animals and insects. And I mean, it's just accumulating damage. Because I mean, in a stable climate regime, you're going to have, extreme events that cause damage or destruction to humans or ecosystems or something like that. But as long as they're rare, then it's not a problem because you can recover over time. But if you're getting more events that pile up and accumulate, causing cumulative damage over time. And it's not just like I said, the same type of event. It's these succession of multiple events that are completely different from each other. So, like even here on the Southern Plains, or south of me on the Southern Plains, this time last year it was severe drought, extreme drought. I mean, I'm sure you could go on YouTube and watch, watch you talk about drought and the mega fires that were in Oklahoma, in the same places that are getting a mega flood tonight.
Right.
I mean, it's the same, deal. In other parts of the country, Florida, had significant drought up until around this time last year, if I remember correctly. Then they started getting tons and tons and tons of rain, and within like 2 or 3 weeks, it wiped out severe to extreme drought in parts of that state, and they were getting floods.
Right.
And and so it's been this rapid fire. Past several years, drought was a big problem in the United States, in the West, in the Southern Plains, and it would come and go in the Southeast. You had huge fires a couple of years ago in Tennessee. Now they got all this water. They got tons of water and flooding here on the plains. They have tons of water and flooding, or mudslides in California. Right. So I mean, it's just bang, 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 bang. You recover from one thing and you only just swing to the opposite extreme, and you have to deal with destruction from the other extreme. And I mean, you're starting to see those effects on agriculture. You have agricultural production down. In Europe, agricultural production being severely impacted. In Australia, to the point they need grain from Europe to help them, maintain their supply in Australia. And then you have obviously a severe loss of planting and last year's crops that were stored in the plains in Midwest U.S. And so, I mean, this may be a year where some of the theoretical idea of having multiple hits, either from drought or from flooding in multiple parts of the world simultaneously or within quick succession, within say a year, has major impacts economically and on the ability of people to feed themselves, to afford the food that they want to eat.
Yeah. Well, and hopefully, I mean, I don't know what the state of our reserves are. I know that a lot of corn that was, grains that were stored were also damaged in the floods, also damaged in the bomb cyclone. And so I don't know, I'm not really sure where the actual official tallies are, but hopefully we have enough, this year to weather any shortages. I don't know. I don't know what that. Yeah, I'm sure that's going to start.
I'm not fully sure either.
In a couple of months, we're going to start. They'll start talking about, well, we only have this much crop production this year, so this is how it's going.
I guess it sounds like for now that those investors that invest in agriculture, they're not seeing something scary yet. But really, when it comes to people that gamble in the market, it's really about what's directly in their face, or what they perceive is in their face coming down the pike. And so if we continue to get these big events that either prevent planting or they damage what was being planted successfully, and we don't see the supply recovering, then that's when you'll start to have kind of a major problem, both in terms of, for the investors it's money, but for the rest of us that actually, know we can't eat money, it'll be food.
Exactly. All that doesn't matter.
I mean, we may not.
Give me 1 second. I got to pause for a second.
Yeah.
All right. I think we're back on. Are you still there? Maybe Nick has are you still there?
Yeah. Okay, did it freeze up or something?
Yeah, you froze for a second. All right. Okay. So I wanted to ask you another. So I follow you on Facebook, and you have a pretty steady stream of weather news. Where do you get most of your climate information, or your climate news? I know you're a meteorologist, so you kind of have your your ear to the ground around that. But like, where do you usually tune in to get, the latest weather stuff? Do you just sift through a bunch of sources, or,
Yeah, I like to sometimes I get it from readers of my blog, or from just from Facebook, other people sharing things.
right,
Sometimes I do Google searches to try to find the information that I can find.
right,
So I try to dig around, some, but I wish it was more on the on mainstream media about climate change. I guess why everyone comes to me
right,
because they don't really, because a lot of the information you get, sometimes some of it's from mainstream sources like Bloomberg or whatever. Other it's like alternative media, especially when you're dealing with more serious, dire news that doesn't really get talked about in mainstream too often. But I usually go digging around a lot pretty well to find what I'm looking for.
right. Okay. Yeah. I mean, that,
Mhm.
I kind of get an avalanche and an onslaught of information and news. I don't know. Um, but it's interesting, it's kind of a good way to keep it in front of people. Like when you have it on a Facebook feed, when you have the way that
Yeah,
you're doing it, um, it is kind of like, you are kind of like a news channel on some level. You're a climate change news channel.
yeah,
You're putting information out there, on a continuous basis and keeping people abreast of what's going on. So, it's really helpful because I don't, there are, it's like people that are understand what's going on with climate change they all kind of congregate in this. There's a circle of people that do that. Facebook has like all these
yeah,
clicks, right? So
yeah,
the climate change folks aren't really like, there are a couple in my Facebook feed, but for the most part, a lot of the people that are in my circle don't really talk about climate change too much, although I'm seeing it more and more. I
yeah.
just saw a couple of my friends talking about how it was 84 degrees in the Arctic, yesterday or whatever, and
Yeah.
they're like, oh, that's not good. It's like, so it isn't good at all.
Yeah.
And so yeah. um so just maybe to talk about that. So obviously we're getting this weird weather whiplash, and weather extremes in the southern, parts of the United States. So how is that being affected, and what is affecting that as far as like what's going on in the Arctic? I don't know if you're hearing my dog. Excuse me. It's my dog.
No problem. Um, basically, I've been seeing more and more the past few years is that the Arctic seems to be the in the driver's seat as far as abrupt climate change. Like its pace is accelerating because you have one area of the Earth that's becoming far more anomalous in terms of its heating relative to its climate regionally than the climate global climate is as a whole relative to its norms. So, I mean, the changes up in the Arctic have been extremely profound because of the sea ice feedback, the loss of sea ice from the Arctic, and also the extensive warming of the winters and increasingly more the springtime months. I mean, I just heard today that the NOAA had determined that the Arctic sea ice had the lowest average on record for the month of April, this April. So you're having, I mean, that average is average lower, so probably record low average for albedo, which means you're having more heat pouring into the Arctic, into the climate system ultimately. Um, so it's it just drives everything because it's impacting the jet stream, slowing it down, making it wavier because the jet stream depends upon temperature gradients in the upper atmosphere to function. And so the stronger the temperature gradient, the stronger the pressure gradient. And so the faster the winds are, and obviously the winds get turned by Coriolis force from the rotating Earth. And so you get a very straight jet stream. You weaken those gradients, you weaken Coriolis, And so as a result, you get bigger, higher amplitude waves that don't progress as far east to west. So you get places that are stuck in these weather patterns for a long time, and they get very wet or they get very dry, they get very hot or cold. We've been abnormally cold, minus some weirdly strange anomalous hot days. We've been
Right.
very really cold all winter and spring in Nebraska, whereas other places has been very warm. And then obviously there's been a lot of water, a lot of wetness in a lot of parts of the United States. And I mean, it's just the United States. This affects much of the northern hemisphere, and the southern hemisphere is starting to have greater impacts to their jet stream too, as increasingly sea ice loss down there impacts the circulation patterns down there. So and then of course we're not even discussing the things that still have yet to really ramp up, like the permafrost melting, getting to the point that it starts releasing so much more CO2 and methane and everything else. So I mean, it's really in the driver's seat. I mean, global warming and ocean warming is doing other things too, such as enhancing El Ninos. The El Ninos are getting more frequent. They're getting stronger. There's finally some research to actually show that over a multi-century time scale, showing that the El Ninos in recent years have been getting stronger and more frequent, and you're getting more of these Central Pacific El Ninos, where you get warming not so much in the Eastern Pacific, but in the Central Tropical Pacific near Hawaii, which of course can drive greater hurricanes near Hawaii. And also it doesn't suppress the Atlantic hurricane season as well as the Eastern Pacific El Ninos do. So, which means you could get, extremes in hurricane activity in parts of the Central and Eastern Pacific, but also it doesn't suppress the Atlantic as much. So, it's fundamental changes in how things we've seen it used to be stable are no longer are. And there's a lot going on around the world, but it seems the Arctic is really driving everything. I mean, even the Antarctic melt of ice increasingly from a rising ocean, the Greenland is melting faster, and as that helps raise the sea levels, you get warmer water creeping up underneath the Antarctic's ice and the glaciers that are based on the bedrock that's below sea level. That floods with more warm water and accelerates melt from Antarctica. James Hansen did at least one paper discussing that weird feedback mechanism between Greenland and Antarctica, where Greenland melt could accelerate melt from Antarctica. So the Arctic is just driving everything. So whatever the Arctic is doing, to me, seems to be the main focus of what's happening globally.
Yeah. And how do you feel about where we are as far as a blue ocean event?
Well, I mean, as far as a blue ocean event, I don't think it'll happen this year. If you're talking about 1 million or less square kilometers of ice for a day or more in September. I mean, if it's only for a day or two, it's it could be possible, because it seems like we may be on a trend toward at least a record. I could see a record low sea ice minimum in September, just based on everything that's happened so far and is happening now.
Do you think we'll beat 2016 this year? I mean, 2016 is still the record low, right?
Or 2012.
Oh, 2012 is still the record. I thought it was 2016. Yeah.
I think it was top 2 or 3 in 2016, if I remember.
I stand corrected. So I mean, do you think it'll be lower than 2012?
I think there's a fairly higher risk of it this year, just based on everything you're seeing from the very low melt in the spring going into springtime, when you have the rising sun, to the fact that the ocean around the sea ice and likely under it is continuing to get warmer every single year, and then the El Nino pattern expected to persist summer, They don't know. I don't think they really know whether it'll persist in the fall or re-intensify or turn into another La Nina. But it looks to persist into the summer, which means you could have elevated temperatures globally,
Yeah.
which ultimately affects the Arctic because a lot of heat transport goes to the Arctic. So I could certainly see, especially if there's storms again in August and early September that could destroy thin ice. I could definitely see it breaking 2012 record. But as far as a blue ocean event, that seems to be just because of the very wildly oscillating year-to-year variability there seems to be, especially, we had the record in 2012, and then we had some increase in volume and extent for a couple of years, and then we've been sort of declining again. There seems to be, as the system heads for this ultimate collapse that we know is coming, you're getting more wildly oscillating
It's
years
teetering
where
drunkenly.
it recovers and then it falls off. And in the past couple of years, it's been starting to fall off again. So will it recover again, even as the planet continues to warm as a whole, even as the Arctic continues to warm? It's possible. There's all sorts of weird things going on in competing feedbacks that try to slow the melt of the ice down. It's a losing war for the negative feedbacks,
Right.
but they do sometimes win out in one year or another.
Yeah.
But it just looking at, if you want to look at a really perhaps conservative linear trend going from like 1979 to now, it seems that at the latest, I would assume the latest, because there is some exponentiality to these processes, that you would see September sea ice volume drop to 0 on average in the month. So basically no ice exists in September, most of September, by the late 2020s. And of course, you probably sense that it's going to be a lot earlier than that, especially even for a monthly average. But looking at a linear trend, that's pretty much as far as you can go with any sense of optimism based on the long-term, multi-decade record that we have. Would be the late 2020s.
Yeah, I mean, like it would be amazing if we still had sea ice in 10 years. I mean, that would be something to be like, okay.
That's why I mentioned. I mean, there's some value in mentioning these conservative numbers that seem, to us, that's obviously and even in data see these more abrupt exponential changes. It seems laughable, but it really gives you a sense really of how close it actually is. Because if you're doing a linear trend and it's like only 10 years away, right. It's kind of like, it's probably a lot closer than you would want.
Well, yeah, I mean, and so, just looking at what has happened in the Arctic in the last year, we had that point sometime in the winter last year where the ice, or I think it was last fall, where the ice had, the thick multi-year ice had moved off of Canada, off the coast of Canada, right? This one part that was like, some of the most, long-lasting, the ice that they thought would never, would be the last to go, like actually moved. There was a gap there of ocean, which is like, like that's part, and then you have also, in 2012, I think the low extent was because of a cyclone, right? Because the ice they had a big storm.
Basically, you had all the ice that wasn't multi-year ice in the Central Arctic Basin offshore Greenland was destroyed, and what you're left with was the thicker ice. It was in decline in 2012 compared to the 80s, but there was still a fair amount of it left. Now a lot of that is not there anymore.
Right. It's gone. So we have no multi-year ice, and so the ice has basically become this thin layer of. Yeah.
And you're just basically waiting.
Thin ice.
Yeah, you're just waiting for the end of it. I mean, it's basically, it's a hospice, the multi-year ice, like ice that's, greater than 3 to 4 years old is almost extinct. You're going to talk about extinction event. There's an extinction event right there, multi-year ice.
So it's,
old ice is almost gone from the
yeah, I mean, we're at a point
Arctic
where,
Ocean.
to me, it seems like the Blue Ocean event just really relies on whether we, have a big storm come through the Arctic or not. Like it just really takes one big, system to come through and just, that's it, it would be a very quick, unfortunately, like, I don't want that to happen. It's the last thing that I want to see happen, but I'm just,
Yeah,
very
I mean,
nervous,
it really
very, very
at
nervous.
this. You're right. I mean, at this point, it really is, and it really is like one extreme event away from happening. Basically, the way I could see it happening is in August or September. It'd be worse if it was in August because the sun is much higher in the sky in August than September. But in August or September, get a big historic storm move, or a series of smaller, but still significant storms moving through the Arctic. They do this a lot of the same thing they did in 2012. Perhaps one is bigger than the ones in 2012, but they destroy most of the ice in the basin, and the ice is much thinner, deeper into the Arctic basin than it was in 2012. So you end up being left with, maybe 900,000 square kilometers of ice or 800,000 square kilometers of ice. You're in official blue ocean criteria. I mean, even something like really ridiculous, like 1.2 million. It would be a signal that your Arctic is near completed its transition to a more temperate state. Like you could have this blue ocean event in September or even in August and still have refreeze in the winter. I mean, even after that, you still have the polar night still cold, but that ice is going to be very thin.
Right.
It's not going to be, and it's going to be very thin and deep into the middle of the basin. It's probably going to take until November or December to freeze because that's what happened. A lot of these seas the past couple of years, the Bering Sea took and the Chukchi Sea took until December to start freezing a couple of years ago. And Bering Sea had similar problems this year. The Kara and Laptev seas had problems refreezing until like October or November last fall. So when you have that, if you have the Blue Ocean event, that's what's going to be happening. Except it's going to be happening in the Central Arctic Basin, where it's going to take until really late to refreeze. And so by February, maybe you have this relatively thin crust of ice that's more able to be destroyed in March or April. And then maybe by you have the Blue Ocean event in August. Maybe next year you have it in June. I mean, it's just very abrupt change that would occur just over a matter of a couple of years. I mean, it's probably already underway. I mean, we could very well have it, the Blue Ocean event, in the next 2 or 3 years. Well, this is the start of what's happening in the Bering Sea, the Beaufort Sea, the Laptev and Kara seas. And of course, once that starts happening more abruptly, that leads to greater warming of the coastal areas of the Arctic, which melt more permafrost, release more greenhouse gases, and of course, you get warm winds blowing on Greenland, which accelerate the melt from Greenland into the ocean, accelerating sea level rise much more dramatically.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, it's really the Blue Ocean event is not really like a single event and everything starts. It's a process. And so all the processes we'll see after the event are already happening now. They will just accelerate a little bit more. So you have this exponential rise in sea level rise and everything else. And then maybe the Blue Ocean event reaches sort of a critical point and suddenly it upticks and goes up a little bit faster.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's, yeah, the idea that a Blue Ocean event would be like the start of the end, or whatever, but the end of I mean, even if we had ice, even if we had short Blue Ocean events, like for the next few years, but we still had ice. I mean, I think we're already seeing the effects of extreme weather cascading weather events, weather disruption,
Yeah.
crop disruption, heavier, stronger cyclones, more frequent and more frequent rain events. And, like these, it's, as you say, the process is already, transforming our system into something that we don't recognize, and plants
Yeah.
certainly don't recognize it, and insects and other animals don't recognize it, and
Yeah.
making it difficult, for them to continue, the regular patterns.
Yeah.
And it's, so I actually, I'd like to wrap this up in about 5 minutes. So I wanted to just give you a little bit of time to talk about, what you see happening, over the next year or two. And maybe, maybe what you think you might do in the face of what's happening in the next year or two. I don't,
Yeah.
random question. Sorry.
Well, I mean, as far as next year or two, or maybe 5 years, I mean, the the Blue Oceans event or Blue Ocean State. I mean, that's pretty much um, it's inevitable. Obviously, it's imminent from a annual standpoint. So, in any given year, even this year, I could be wrong, but in any given year from here on out, it could happen. And obviously, the lead up to that, and then after that is will continue the acceleration of climate change, and climate change will continue to accelerate. We're seeing basically all these metrics that we look at: heat, fires, floods. Everything is picking up pace to a significant degree. So there will be um, more fires, floods, and extreme heat events on this planet 5 years from now than there are now. Maybe dramatically more. I did a post discussing the exponential projections based on the exponential change that had happened in those events since the 50s and 60s, just to sort of demonstrate that. But it could be a little slower, it could be a little faster, but it doesn't take much more at this point to do much more damage. I think agriculture is going to continue to suffer greater impacts on the planet because we're starting to see more profound heat and flood events on the land, and causing greater erosion. So there'll be more significant problems economically. And obviously, if there's an economic collapse because of problems with global debt and resource depletion, then all of that will go faster. I do see generally more problems with. I think climate migration is going to start to become one of the biggest issues countries will face in the next 5 years. I mean, that's not a purely meteorological thing, but it's connected to it.
Sure.
And so, you're getting greater heat, drought, and superstorms, if you want to call it that. These super hurricanes and typhoons. And it's going to get to a point where people are losing everything, and there's no way to rebuild because there are no resources to rebuild with anymore. Or the economies of their countries are falling apart, so they can't get any help. So what are they going to do? They're going to pick up what they have left, get in a boat, or get in a car, or get in stuff themselves, like some of these sadly some of these migrants do coming from Mexico themselves, and get human trafficked to get out of where they are. And we've already seen the beginnings of that. Some of some of these migrations from Central America, that Trump has been trying to fight against, and some of that is climate change related, or at least exacerbated by climate change down there, in addition to U.S. policy problems from previous decades. So that's going to get much worse. I think that's going to be like really, 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 really big thing.
Sure.
Just humans moving. And I guess for me, as far as I deal with them, I kind of deal with what's happening one day at a time. I mostly just try to live my life with some sense of normalcy. Although I know, especially with the economy, I kind of have an idea of what's coming down the pike, and it doesn't look very good. I
Yeah.
see, food prices, gas prices, things going up,
Yeah.
even now. So,
Yeah.
it's not really much I can do to control the situation. I mean, I can plan for individual severe events, build an emergency kit to deal with a tornado or a flood or something. But,
Right.
these things happening are just so much bigger than one person.
Yeah.
And so it's very hard you can't really plan for a global catastrophe. You just kind of like,
Where do you go?
you just kind of deal with it in your own little locality. And I guess if something bad happens here, then we'll be like the migrants from Mexico or the Asians going up to China or something. They have to
Right.
move,
Well, and you think about
Cubans or
right.
Cubans and Puerto Ricans, like they had to do after those hurricanes.
Yeah. I mean, and you think about, people who are prepping or maybe have, their homesteads and, that's all,
Yeah.
that's all good. However, you could have a severe weather event, just wipe out all your stores of food or all your,
Yeah.
all your, your garden or your homestead or whatever. And then you're like, what are you going to do? You kind of have to just pick up and go and figure out what you're going to do in that situation. So it's hard.
Yeah.
It's a hard thing to
I mean,
plan.
that's what humans, I mean, before, before any sort of, if humans are, in fact, included likely to, face extinction, because things get too bad or too ugly. Well, long before that happens, it's going to be humans moving, just like every other species. No individual animal wants to die. So if they got feet, if they got, got fins, they're gonna try to escape,
Right.
and that's already happening. Humans are another species, and so guess what? You can't, you lose your habitat. What do? You move to another place.
Right.
That's what's going to happen on a bigger scale.
Yeah. It's a lot of times I'm trying to enjoy the normalcy myself, as long as possible.
Yeah.
Just, I'm enjoying, on some level, I'm enjoying the hamster wheel of whatever it is that, first world,
yeah, I get that. That's what yeah. I mean, we could be, it could be in, Africa right now, trying to pick up the pieces from a giant hurricane, or losing all our crops. Or in India. Yeah. So, I mean, we have some privilege that came from, a bunch of oil barons digging into the ground 100 years ago. Before that, coal barons. So
I mean, and
but we all get to pay for that. We all get to pay the debt. The U.S. The Earth is looking for its payment plan. Where's the payment? Oh, the payment's your species.
Right.
It seems to be going in that direction. Sort of. What is it? The devil's bargain or whatever. So
No, Mother Nature is real mad, and she's she's about to put a whooping on us. So
yeah.
Enjoy it while it lasts. So well, thank you, Nick. I appreciate you coming on the show. I got to wrap it up, man. But I always enjoy having you on. I enjoy your take, and I enjoy following your page on Facebook. I'm going to link your meteorologist page on this video, and I also link your Patreon. So I know you do some writing and some videos on Patreon, so people can check you out there and support what you're doing. And I support what you're doing, and thank you. I appreciate keep up the good work, and hope to have you on again sometime soon.
Yeah. Thanks a lot for having me.
Yeah. All right, man. Well, have a good one, and we'll talk to you very soon.
All right. You too.
All right. Peace.